Using the appropriate verb throughout your manuscript ensures smooth expression, brings fluidity to your writing, and improves overall cohesion of your manuscript. Although the wrong use of tenses does not affect the thematic aspect of your manuscript, it actually fractures the structure of your paper. Editors will consider it as a glaring grammatical glitch. One way to gain accuracy is to observe how tenses are properly used in the scientific written discourse. You need to observe a large corpus of research papers and understand how previous researchers have used it for various sections. Now let me show you a sample research paper and walk you through the various sections of a research paper and how to use appropriate tenses in each section. Let me also give you some practical examples on how it is used in context. I leave a link of the cheat sheet on tenses in the description box. You may download it and use it in the ambit of your research.
Let's take a look at the paper and let's see how the tenses are applied in each section of the research paper. Well, starting from the abstract. See, abstract is a combination of various sections of a research paper. So the combination of various tenses will be used in the abstract. See, whenever you talk about the aim and objectives, you will use the present tense. See, I have highlighted that in yellow. The objective of this study is to find if self-efficacy theory has a positive effect on learning outcomes. So whenever you introduce your aims or objectives of the study, you will use the present tense. And then the second part of your abstract is usually the methods. So you will say what you actually did. So it's a completed task. So you will be using the past tense. So take a look at the sentence which are highlighted in green. We have two groups of learners who were enrolled in an online course. 72 students participated in the study. So you will be using past tense for talking about completed actions. So the second part of your abstract is the method. And the third part of your abstract is the results. And in the results section also, you will use the past tense because you're only reporting the research which you have already completed. So you will be using the past tense. See, a comparison of pre and post course showed that the principles of self-efficacy led to a positive impact. So you will be using the past tense. And finally, when you talk about the research gap, you will use the present tense. Let's take a look at the sentence which is highlighted in red. Given the dearth of research on self-efficacy and language learning, this study merits further investigation. So this abstract, which tense should be used in abstract? Of course, there are some conflicting opinions in the research community, but since it's an combination of various sections of a research paper, you will be using a combination of tenses, especially the present, past, and the present perfect. Now let's take a look at the introduction section. So the introduction section usually starts with the general background information about the study. So you will be using the present tense. Take a look at the sample sentence. Remote learning is a fascinating area to explore in language learning context. So you will be describing the general background in the present tense. You will use the present perfect to talk about the previous research. See, you have to add extra leverage to your background by citing some previous studies. So in that case, you will be using the present perfect. As I said, whenever you talk about your previous research and with proper reference. Look at the sentence which is highlighted in green. Previous research studies have reported on the effectiveness of self-efficacy. And then you will be defining the difficult terms in the introduction. For example, this study talks about self-efficacy. So the readers should exactly know what self-efficacy is. So you'll provide some definition and description of facts. So in that context, you will use the simple present. Take a look at the sentence highlighted in blue. Self-efficacy denotes learners' belief to perform activities that results in improved task performance. So you'll be using simple present when you define facts. You can also use present perfect whenever you talk about previous studies. In the review of literature section, you will use a combination of past, present, and present perfect. Whenever you report on previous studies, you will use the past tense. Look at the sentence that's highlighted in green. Beldo and Stark address the positive effect and dynamic nature of self-efficacy theory. You may also use the present perfect. Other researchers have studied this trend. Other researchers have used similar such approaches. So both past tense and present perfect are perfectly fine when you report your earlier studies. So whenever you talk about research gap, you may use the present tense. So look at the word that's highlighted in gray. Further research is needed to reveal whether the principles of self-efficacy increases the learning outcomes. So you will be using a combination of the past, present, and the present perfect. In the method section, we use the past tense predominantly. As a researcher usually reports on a study or an experiment which has already been conducted. Usually in the method section, since we restate the research questions, you can use present tense to restate the research questions. For example, the first research question the second research question aims to measure. So you can use the present tense to restate the research questions. But you can also use a combination of past and past perfect when describing the methods. For example, look at the text that is highlighted in gray. A quasi-experimental research design was employed. Other researchers have used such similar approaches. So it's a combination of past and past perfect. Terms like was employed or have used. You can use, as I said, the combination of past and past perfect when describing the methods. So you look at the text that is highlighted in violet. The study was conducted, 126 students participated. So predominantly we use past tense because you're reporting studies which has already been complete. One important thing we need to remember is, especially when you mention the figures, you should mention that in present tense. So figure 1 shows the details of the study. So when you refer to figures and tables, you are supposed to write it in simple present. Just like the method section, even in the results section, you use the past tense to summarize the results. Take a look at the sentences which are highlighted in yellow. The samples of both groups were analyzed using a paired sample t-test. Performance outcomes and the impact of verbal persuasion are analyzed separately. So you use the sentences in past tense. But to compare your results with the results of the earlier studies, you use the present perfect. Look at the sentences highlighted in green. some previous studies have provided contrasting results to our studies. So whenever you compare the results of your studies to previous studies, which you actually do in your results section, you have to mention the present perfect. And you will use the present tense to interpret the results. See the next sentence. The mean scores indicate that the students of self-efficacy perform better. So whenever you interpret the results, you use the present tense. To just report the results, you use past tense. Remember, but to interpret it, you will use present tense. And present tense is also used to describe the tables and figures. Like I said earlier, table 1 shows the results of the pre and post test. So for mentioning, whenever you mention tables and figures, those sentences should invariably be presented in the present tense. The discussion section is one of the trickiest sections, because in this segment you will use a combination of different tenses. At the outset, you will use the past tense to summarize the findings. For instance, we investigated the impact of, and we use the present tense to interpret the results. The findings show that. So present tense to summarize, past tense to summarize, and present tense to interpret. Let's move on to implications of the study. Whenever you talk about the implications of the study, it is advisable to use the present tense. Look at the sentences highlighted in gray. There is a renewed interest in the remote models of learning. The study benefits language instructors and policymakers. It provides interesting caveats for designing language immersion programs. It deals with. So you will be using present tense whenever you talk about implications. You can also use future tense when you talk about implications. Look at this sentence. The learners will clearly benefit from the principles of self-efficacy. So you either use the present tense, or you may also use the future tense whenever you talk about the implications. And moving on to limitations, you use the past tense for mentioning the limitations. Look at this sentence. We sought to follow a true experimental design, but we acknowledge that we were not able to do so. So you use the past tense, that we were not able to do. Ultimately, whenever you talk about the scope for future studies, it is advisable to use the present tense. So look at the sentence highlighted in red. In the light of these contrasting findings, this study suggests a large-scale intervention study. So you use the present tense for mentioning or referring to the scope of future studies. So I believe that this application on the use of tenses in the various segments of research paper has helped you to understand. But however, these are just a few examples. As I said before, please look at the patterns of how the tenses are used from good journals. I'm sure you will understand the nuances. Thank you for listening.